Tonight on Free Minds TV, it's my great pleasure to tell you that 3 key provisions of the Patriot Act have been allowed to expire. Also, we'll be getting into Ron Paul taking on monetary policy, and he's the head of a new subcommittee, so, well, he might actually have a bit more sway. Plus, we'll be getting into stories about a pot catapult on the Mexican border. That coming up tonight on Free Minds TV.
And thank you for tuning in to episode 191 of Free Minds TV, where we challenge you, the viewer, to think outside the box. As always, it is Toby here with you.
And Nick.
You know, it's been another week since we were on the air, Nick. I don't think we've ever in the history of Free Minds TV missed this many episodes in 1 month span.
Snow day.
Snow, I mean, we've been getting hit by it, and the studio's been closed, so we couldn't come in to do a show on our day, so we apologize. That's why we're a little sporadic here for the people who like to tune in every week. We do apologize for that. We're here as whenever the studio is open.
It's been a crappy winter so far.
Yep. Also in the intro, I said episode 191. I also said that last week. Last week it was really episode 190. This is the true episode 191. So wanted to just put that out on the floor immediately before we get into the stories we will be talking about today. And they are good ones. I mean, we've had a couple weeks to think about what we want to talk about here. And I actually had to throw out some of this stuff because...
Well, it gets dated after a while.
It does get dated after a while, and there was also some really, actually, exciting stuff to talk about that is just coming out as we shoot this. It's breaking news, essentially. I mean, I was listening to the news reports as I drove into the studio today, and we're going to be talking about those 2 stories. Of course, that's the Patriot Act, as you said in the intro there, as well as some of the Ron Paul taking on that committee where he actually may have some sway on what goes on with monetary policy.
It's not a new committee. Ron Paul is new at being the chairman of the committee.
And we actually talked a lot about him getting that position, but now he's getting right into it. So that's really important to talk about. We will be talking about that right in the beginning of the show before we're getting into a bill in Washington that may actually legalize selling marijuana in liquor stores, as well as the Mexicans.
Washington State,
that is, yes. As well as those Mexican drug cartels. They always finding ingenious new ways with a catapult to get. Actually. I mean, they gave up on the tunnels, I guess. I don't know. I'm sure
they're still tunneling.
But, I mean, they're going all directions. Tunnel down, catapult through the air somehow. It's going to get across the border.
Probably a cannon.
We'll be getting into those stories. But first, let's start with it, Nick. I'm not going to lie. I'm surprised.
Well, I'm a little bit surprised too, but this is sort of the right thing happening for the wrong reasons when we're talking about why these provisions of the Patriot Act were not renewed. And it's basically a political misstep. It looks like the Republican leadership in the House of Representatives misjudged just how much party cohesion they had. So what they did was they actually tried to pass these renewals of certain provisions of the Patriot Act under rules that allowed for an expedited passage. That's basically no debate. I'm not a fan of these expedited House rules. I think everything should be debated fully. But under these expedited rules, you need a 2/3 majority of the members present voting in favor, not a simple 50% majority. So they misjudged, and they just barely, I think by about 7 votes, they missed the 2/3 majority that they needed. So the measure to renew, it was favored by a majority, but not a supermajority. It was voted for 277 to 148, not enough to pass, thankfully. The provisions which have died for the moment are court-approved roving wiretaps of multiple phones. This is basically where the FBI or any other law enforcement agency can get a court order to tap phones related to a terror investigation, but they don't actually really have to name the persons whose phones they're going to tap or the phone numbers. They can just pick a whole bunch of them if they think it's related, so even vaguely related to the investigation. The library records provision, which was talked about a lot, it hasn't been talked about so much recently, but it was one of the more Big Brother provisions when the Patriot Act first came out that sparked a lot of criticism. They won't be able to look at every library book you've checked out or every website you've visited on a computer at the library, just because it might be in some way related to terrorism. They're going to need to get a court order that's much more specific, like they would for a normal criminal investigation, like they did before the Patriot Act. and the so-called lone wolf provision, which in part allowed for surveillance of non-U.S. persons. I'm not actually sure exactly how this was applied, whether it means non-U.S. citizens on U.S. soil or people outside the U.S., but it allowed surveillance of non-U.S. persons who have no known link to terror. So basically, we can just spy on anybody who's not a U.S. citizen, even if we don't really have a reason to think they're a threat.
We made small gains. I mean, these are a
Right.
few of the very minor provisions in a gigantic bill that overarches a whole lot. So, I mean, it's a minor victory.
Well, and if they really wanted to try to bring this back, they could always introduce new legislation and try to pass it under, without a suspension of the rules, under the normal House rules with a full debate, and they would have the votes to pass it in the House if they wanted to do that.
Yeah. I mean, then again, they can still figure out your search history at home pretty easily if they're not going to be doing it by going through your ISP. They can just simply buy the data from a data collection company. So that's always an around the back rule of the Fourth Amendment. That's one that I actually, very interesting to me. I mean, there's these laws about, government spying on what I'm looking at on the internet. Well, don't they need a warrant if they're going to be going to my ISP? Well, they don't need to anymore because, there's third parties out there that collect data on you that can just sell it to the government. I think that's just something interesting that's not really talked about very much. But
We don't like to talk about it because it's creepy.
Well, it is. But
there's nothing we've been able to do about it.
Well, it's a complete backdoor around the Fourth Amendment. Not
Right.
to say that the Fourth Amendment is paid attention to anyway.
Right.
But,
I mean, these are just three provisions. I want to make it clear that the Patriot Act, everything but these three provisions, as I understand it, is still in effect. So there are still far more powers in the hands of, most of them unconstitutional in my opinion, but there are still far more powers that have been given to law enforcement agencies than they had prior to September 11th.
Sure.
So, it was a big bill. It was 600-something pages. Most of it's still in effect.
Still, I think it's important to talk about because, I mean, I'm surprised. I thought that it would just continue to pass. So, good news there. Hopefully we can continue down this path of good news. As you mentioned, Nick, there were a few Tea Party people who went against the vote, and
it was enough to make the difference. There were 7 of them.
Yeah, so that's.
Of course, there were 26 Republicans. So actually, most
Sure.
of the Republicans who voted to not renew these provisions were not Tea Party Republicans.
I'll take it where we can get it.
Right.
Little steps of.
This is good news.
This is like a couple steps forward. I mean, yes, we've probably taken 25 steps back today, but we took a couple steps forward as well. So,
Right.
Good. All right, Nick.
It's not all bad news.
Moving right along, some more good news, or potential good news.
Yeah, out of Washington. I mean, it's sort of. Remember, there's a lot going on in Washington. Most of it bad. I haven't changed my mind in the last couple weeks, and I think that the ship of state is suddenly turning in a good direction. It's just not likely to happen. But some of these things are encouraging. I'm glad that some of these ideas are being discussed. And one person in Washington who is good at discussing ideas is Congressman Ron Paul of Texas. Now, he's been serving for years on the House Budget Committee. I never thought that they would actually give him a chairmanship of any kind because, he's not particularly, now that the Republicans have taken over, it's kind of the House leadership's, the Republican leadership's decision who they hand out these chairmanships to. He's not too popular within his own party because he doesn't toe a Republican line. He's a principled small government guy, really a libertarian, so the Republican leadership doesn't necessarily like him, but he was right on a lot of things. And Ron Paul has been right. It's hard to deny that he has been right on things like the housing crisis, which he called before it was mainstream. He was laughed at when he said that there was a financial crisis coming in the United States in the last presidential debates. People weren't laughing for too very long. So now he chairs the subcommittee on domestic monetary policy, which sounds rather boring, but it's very important. This has to do with the House oversight of the Federal Reserve. Ron Paul has authored a bill to audit the Federal Reserve System. He's also authored a bill which has received far less support to do away with the Federal Reserve System, which I think would be great. But, I mean, now he's in a position, maybe not to question Ben Bernanke specifically in person, because Bernanke will show up in front of the full committee, not in front of Paul's subcommittee. But it does give Ron Paul the opportunity to question a lot of central bankers, people who are involved in forming U.S. monetary policy at the Fed, at the Treasury. He's actually in a very powerful position when you consider that monetary policy is his pet issue. And I guess he's starting this week, starting with hearings. And the first hearing, he said he would start off with 2 Austrian or free market economists and only 1 Keynesian. So the tables are. I never thought we would see a U.S. congressperson say that they were going to call a lot of Austrian economists to talk about monetary policy. It's a good sign.
Definitely something interesting, something to watch. I mean, it is like a small glimmering hope out there, but I mean, it's one guy fighting against the most powerful people in the entire world, the people who control the financial system pretty much of the world. I mean, not entirely, but the Fed, the people
it's the
behind
most powerful
the Fed,
financial
it's definitely
institution
the most,
world.
I would arguably the most powerful institution out there. I mean, it
up there.
has a lot of control about what goes on in the world.
Right, and very little oversight in terms of actual oversight, very little accountability to you, the American voter or taxpayer, and to the U.S. Congress. They pretty much do whatever the heck they want. And it's very, I mean, a lot of people who claim to be free market thinkers are big supporters of this idea of an independent Fed that's not subject to political pressure as well. It's not very free market, the idea that you have a private, semi-privatized central bank with a government monopoly on setting interest rates, determining the value of money both through interest rates and controlling the monetary supply. It's not free market. You're giving a private monopoly the ability to issue fiat money, pieces of paper, basically control 1/2 of every financial transaction that takes place in the U.S. and most of the world, because most international transactions are settled in terms of U.S. dollars. That's why it's called the reserve currency of the world.
And as we've pointed out many times, no idea. The representatives of this country have no idea what goes on, how much money is printed, how much money is made, how much is loaned out, how much exists, what's going on there, and that's what
it's a secret private central bank.
And that's what Ron Paul's audit the Fed bill would have done, is begin to allow the representatives, the people who control this country, to at least know what's going on. Of course, they don't want that to happen, though. Why wouldn't anyone want that to happen?
Well,
It's
I know
kind
the
of
Fed
obvious.
doesn't want it to happen because they want to maintain control of the money supply. And, I mean, it's... I don't know. We'll see. I think it's the right time for Ron Paul to be taking over a committee like this because we have certain, there's 12 banks in the Federal Reserve System, and they each have their own regional presidents. Some regional presidents saying we're going to have 2% inflation this year. Some saying we're going to have 4%. Nobody's really sure, but I think there's a pretty good case to be made that from the statements that Bernanke has made and from statements, the official position of the Federal Reserve, it looks like they're going to keep interest rates basically at 0 for a very long time, until unemployment comes down, which they've said could be several years before. Bernanke himself has said it will be several years before we see a normal unemployment rate. And they're going to continue with QE2, quantitative easing, which is basically printing money. Printing money to make the economy run is not a good idea.
I've said it before, and I'll say it again. It's making me feel real good about those decisions to take out all those student loans, get that mortgage, and pile on all that other debt I've got, because this is my ticket out.
Inflation does make it easier to pay back debt.
So
it does make it can make it harder to make ends meet in the meantime, and it's harder to save money if you don't have the money.
Sure.
Do things like buy a
But
house.
if you're saving money and the money's being inflated, who cares? I guess, right? I mean, might as well not save it.
It can be beneficial. I mean,
pile on the debt, keep it coming, America.
Right. I mean, it would be wrong to, because a lot of people are saying, "Hey, look, we've got these low interest rates. The stock market's doing great. There's some chatter about commodity prices going up, and they definitely have, but we haven't seen any real super serious problems with inflation yet. But I think it's important to remember that just because the Fed manipulating rates or pumping money into the system, it might make things better, it might make things easier in the short run. The stock market might do great this year. A lot of people who know a lot more about the markets than I do are saying that they're expecting it to do well. It kind of makes sense when you understand monetary policy and you understand that when they dump a whole bunch of money into the system, it leads people to spend the money, whether they're investing in stocks or buying things like gold or oil. So it might be good in the short run, but what might be good for a year is probably not good for the U.S. economy overall.
Unless you're someone like me who has a lot of debt and wants it erased by hyperinflation. Then it's real good. Right?
I don't think hyper and
Not hyper, but
there's a lot. Even if you do have a lot of debt, there are a lot of downsides to inflation. I mean,
if my paycheck continues and it's just inflating the money, it's good, Nick.
well, as long as you've got a
It's
paycheck.
like the
but,
greenbacks back in the 1920s, 30s, 40s. Those people
well,
who took out
greenbacks
those
actually.
loans.
Yeah, well, greenbacks actually they also started during the Civil War with Lincoln. But I mean, I don't know. It's not good though.
Hey,
Inflation
Nick,
is bad.
I'm looking for a silver lining here, and I found it. It's a beautiful, beautiful,
But I don't want to
beautiful
just
world.
present the silver line because when there's inflation, there's uncertainty. That uncertainty leads to things like companies.
Well, that's for the fools who paid
Not
off their
hiring
mortgages and
people,
have a
letting
lot of
people
money in
go.
their savings. Yeah, they're worried. But irresponsible folk like me, well, bring it on.
Yeah.
As long as I can continue making those payments while my paychecks
We'll see.
catch
I mean,
up.
it's hindsight's 2020, but I will be interested to look back. in
You're
10
the
years.
saver. I'm the debt keeper. Let's see who comes out on top.
I'd like to see what. That's true. I'd like to see what I would like to see what how this works out 10 years from now, and by then we'll know.
Yeah, we'll see. It's a bet.
Unless the world ends in 2020.
Oh, yeah. Real scared. Yeah. All right, Nick, moving on to something that I just had. This is a humorous story, if you ask me. To a drug warrior, this is awful. But to someone who comes from a stance of, well, this is a failed war on drugs, most thinking people out there, this is just funny. This is ingenuity at its best. Mexican gangs using catapults to hurl pot into U.S. Mexico. Drug smugglers are using an ancient invention as a new way to move marijuana across the border from Mexico to Arizona. The discovery of 2 drug catapults in Mexico's state of Sonora marked the latest twist in the cat-and-mouse game traffickers play with authorities. U.S. National Guard troops operating a remote surveillance system at the NACO Border Patrol Station say they observed several people preparing a catapult and launching packages over the fence late last week. A Mexican Army officer said that 3-yard tall catapults were found about 20 yards from the U.S. border on a flatbed towed by sports utility vehicles. The officer said the catapult was capable of launching 4.4 pounds of marijuana per launch. Apparently, there were some smugglers around, but they escaped before being captured. And then they also discovered another catapult, blah, 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 in a nearby area. So I guess it's not an isolated catapult. They've got multiple ones along the border there. And, we heard about the tunnels. We hear about all the mules coming through, all these different ways to smuggle drugs into the United States. And to anyone out there who's thinking, it just goes, wow. And we really think we're going to beat this stuff? We're really going to just step up more National Guard troops? We're using National Guard troops now to go after this stuff. I mean, National Guard troops, is that what they're for? I guess they're protecting the country from dangerous marijuana. It just goes to show, I guess, that it's time to change policy because it's not working.
Right.
Nick.
I mean,
they're using catapults.
It's understandable with the current policy why they would have the National Guard there, because under the current policy, the war on drugs policy, the people running drugs across the U.S. border, they're not very nice people, and there is a lot of violence that spills over and things like that. But
if you're having that's part of the black market, Nick. If you're going to have a huge profit motive, which also comes with huge amounts of risk, well, that attracts a certain crowd.
The crowd that will cut your head off and then kick it across the border. Yeah, and quite literally will cut your head off and kick it around. There's no need for this. And it's not reducing. The thing is.
Yeah, wait, let me see. You know how much they seized? Guess
how much?
35 pounds of marijuana, Nick.
Oh, and people talk about that's 35 pounds that didn't hit the street.
Yeah.
Well, no, because they gear up production.
Everyone who wanted pot last week still got it.
It's factored in. I mean, maybe even when you have these massive busts, I remember seeing that
500 tons.
500 tons of marijuana.
A couple months ago.
I mean, the pictures were incredible. It was just a mountain of marijuana that the Mexican military was burning. Never saw even one story. Not that I would really believe the media. But if there was a marijuana shortage on the street, I'm sure the media would report on it. There just simply was not.
It's just a drop in the bucket. And as you said, Nick,
they produce 2 or 3 times what they need is actually going to get across the border, because even if only a third gets through, the profit margins are so high, there's simply no way that you're going to be able to stop this.
Yeah, I mean,
if they don't throw it over the border, they tunnel under.
They've
used submarines before.
And I mean, the fact that you can't get around it. Every time you're going to put up another fence, well, guess what? They bring a catapult. You're going to bust a tunnel. Well, they've got 25 more. Who knows how many tunnels they've got?
Oh, there's a lot of tunnels.
Every time you bust one mule, they're like, "Oh, we caught this mule coming across the border." But as you said, Nick, so true. They factor that in. You bust 10 of their mules, take off 10 of their trucks off, one gets through. Guess what? That's still a good day for the drug traffickers. Still an excellent day. Still making buco bucks for these very bad people, even though you busted 9 out of 10 of the trucks with drugs coming through. And I mean, that's only one of the many reasons why we on this show promote the fact of safer alternatives than a war on drugs, which essentially boils down to huge profit motives for bad people and a war against the American people, your friends, your family, your neighbors. We do not think that we need to treat drug addictions as a criminal matter. No. As many doctors have put it, any kind of an addiction is a medical issue that should be handled by doctors in hospitals, and not by the courts.
And to point, I mean, a lot of people do. I certainly think there are a lot of people who should seek treatment that do have drug problems. That's also not to say, just because somebody uses a substance that's illegal right now, that they are addicted, or that if somebody's using a legal substance, that they're not. Alcohol is legal. There are a lot of alcohol addicts out there. Certainly a lot of alcohol addicts.
Sure.
Nicotine is legal. A lot of nicotine addicts out there in the United States. Marijuana addicts, there are people who do have, whether you're going to say it's technically an addiction or not, there are people who are problem users of things like marijuana.
Of course.
There are also a lot of people who are occasional users, have no problem, really. They don't have a drug problem.
What about the overeaters, Nick? They're everywhere. The fatties.
I mean, so, yeah. And
it's an addiction.
People who do, well, I don't know if I would count that one.
The fatties? Oh, I've seen some of these people, Nick.
There's this drive to try to say that anybody who engages in just has bad habits is, oh, you've got a bad habit.
It's a vice, Nick. Everybody's got a vice. Some people's vice is food.
I'm not
so
sure
they
it might be a vice, but it's not necessarily an addiction.
Whatever. Well, if you're going to call marijuana addiction an addiction, one thing you're going to call food an addiction too. It's a habit. There's but I'm
not sure that I mean, it's not always chemically the same.
Well, arguably, there's been many studies that show that there's no pot addiction. It's a habit that you form.
Well, yeah, with pot. With a lot of other drugs.
But if you're going to compare, pot and food are very similar to compare. It's very close, much closer to apples than it is comparing, say, alcohol to marijuana and its addictive properties.
Or cocaine
to
marijuana.
It's very different. You're much closer equating food to pot than you are equating other drugs to pot.
Yeah, I mean,
so that's my argument there.
Yeah. Well, regardless of whether people get addicted to it,
I don't care if they get addicted.
It shouldn't be illegal.
It's none of my business. I mean, you want to ruin your life, go ruin your life, but I'm not going to waste my tax dollars on throwing you in a cage for it. I don't care. I mean,
that doesn't really stop you from ruining your life.
No, of course. You're going to get the drugs inside. You can't keep drugs out of prison.
Well, even if you don't get the drugs inside, you're in freaking prison.
Sure. So how about this? I mean, shouldn't the punishment just fit the crime? I mean, a punishment of doing cocaine is you ruin your life. Sounds like, one of those natural consequences. Yes? No? I mean, natural consequence to ruining your life, punishment enough. No, we have to punish you more and put you behind a cage and spend billions of dollars feeding and clothing you and treating you like an animal. Anyways, moving on, Nick. There's someone with a solution. Get this. This is genius. Wish I had thought of it. Oh, sorry, I already flipped the page.
You flipped it twice.
Flipped it twice. Here we go. Nice. Bill would legalize pot sales in Washington liquor stores. Oh, what? There's an alternative to just locking these people up, spending billions of dollars, and could actually make a profit off this. The representative's Mary Lou Dickinson wants to do just that. I'm not kidding around. I'm actually serious about doing this. I'm dead serious. We need to stop handling marijuana the way we've been doing so, says the Seattle Democrat. As I said, Washington State, not Washington, D.C. is where this is coming from. She dropped House Bill 1550 on Tuesday, which says she will allow for the sale of marijuana in state-run liquor stores. Quote, there's really a great comparison between the prohibition of alcohol in the 1920s and what we've been doing with marijuana now, says Dickinson. We need to regulate it and get it out of the hands of criminals and drug cartels and tax it. And while personally I don't know exactly how things should be done, this is for some of those more principled libertarian types out there that said, well, the state shouldn't be involved in all. Well, It's better to have the state involved than have a black market on it. At least that's my opinion. Critics argue that further legalization would increase the rate of marijuana use among teens and would be a gateway for people to start using harder drugs. Now, that is one of the most BS, ignoramus statements I've ever heard in my entire life. Let's break that down. Critics argue that further legalization would increase rate among marijuana use among teens. Well, currently, you ask a teen, any survey will show this, multiple, across the United States, which is easier to get, marijuana or alcohol? Always marijuana. It's much easier to get, because guess what? It's on the black market. You don't need an ID to go get it. There's no drug dealer asking for an ID out there. Take it out of the black market, make it not profitable for these big cartels and stuff to be dealing it to kids. It's in the liquor store. Well, much harder to get. Any study out there will show that. That is complete fallacy BS. And it would be a gateway drug for people to start using harder drugs. Every single study that shows why marijuana is a gateway drug is only because it is in the black market. Take it out of the use of drug dealers, i.e. the same people who sell marijuana also sell cocaine, crack, and other hard drugs. Guess what? No longer a gateway drug. It's only a gateway drug by association. So guess what? The teen who gets marijuana goes to his drug dealer, says, can I get some marijuana? Yeah, would you like some coke too? That's the only association with making it a gateway drug. And study after study after study have shown that.
Well, and there's also, if somebody's inclined to, they've got tendencies that would lead them to experiment with drugs, the person who is going to try heroin at some point is also the person that's going to try marijuana first, because they just have so much easier access to marijuana. It's not that the marijuana made them, they were just, somebody who wasn't going to have a drug problem, then they tried marijuana and it turned them into a heroin addict. No, they might have had certain tendencies or whatever that led them to want to experiment with drugs. And of course, most people don't go from heroin to pot.
Yeah, most people start with milk and cookies and then move their way up. But the fact that they say that taking it out of the drug dealer's hands will make it a gateway is the complete opposite.
Well, and marijuana is possession and use, and in some places sale, has been legalized in many countries, places like Europe, where it's de facto legal. And teen usage rates in many of those countries, they didn't go up, and in many of those countries it's much lower than here in the U.S., where we have a full-on war on drugs. So it just, you're not keeping kids safe with a war on drugs.
Sure.
It failed there too.
Sure, and just as a caveat before we wrap up here, we are not on Free Minds TV recommending any illegal activity or even doing drugs. That's not what we're saying. We're not at all doing that. What we're talking about is harm reduction, common sense approach. But losing a war, well, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Are we getting a different result? No. We're out of time. It looks like the blue screen is up. Are we out of time? I thought we had 20 more seconds. I don't know. Maybe. Hey, there we are. 20 more seconds, 15 more seconds. FreeMindsTV.com. In the meantime, we're out. We'd love to hear your comments on our website, though. Until next week, it's been Toby here with you.
And Nick.
Have a good night.